Reading with your kids.
Hola, niho, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni moli wanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jadley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We're coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville, in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and so very honored that you join us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please, please, please tell all of your family and friends about the show. Tell your kids' teachers. Tell your kids' principals and librarians. And also, please subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Ghana, Himalaya, wherever you find your podcast. Our guests today are Pat Zieitlow Miller and E Charlton Trujillo. They are here to celebrate Lupe Lopez Rockstar Rules. Before we invite Pat and E into the studio, we want to let you know that this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by A is for Always, an adoption alphabet written by Linda Cutting. A is for always, with your hand in mind. Adoption is a gift that will last for all time. With gentle rhymes and lovely illustrations, A is for Always celebrates the joy and love of adoption from A to Z. With B for birth parents, Q for questions, and U for understanding, it frames challenging aspects of adoption in a way children can understand. Best of all, each page shows a different adoptive family of cuddly animals welcoming and cherishing a new child. This is a fantastic book if you are part of an adoptive family. This is a fantastic book for any family. A is for Always, an adoption alphabet written by Linda Cutting. Join us right now from the states of Wisconsin and Texas. Our guests are here today to celebrate their brand new picture book. It's called Lupe Lopez Rockstar Rules. Please welcome back to the show our friend Pat Zieitlow Miller. Hey, Pat, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
And also welcome to the show for the first time, Pat's co-author, E Charlton Trujillo. Hey, E, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on the show.
I'm excited to have you on the show. E, why don't we start with you? Who is Lupe Lopez?
I mean, who isn't Lupe Lopez? Lupe is a intelligent, musical, young Latinx, Mexican-American kindergarten girl who believes herself to be rock star drummer supreme and enters the first day of school really wanting to bring that spirit and tenacity, and it doesn't always quite match with the rules of school. So that's a glimpse of Lupe and the lessons she'll learn. And I think Pat can talk a little bit more about Lupe, though. What else would you say about Lupe, Pat?
Yeah, I think Lupe has a really strong sense of who she is, and then she gets into kindergarten and discovers that she has to fit that personality into the structure of a classroom and her teacher's rules, and make some friends along the way. And she does all that, but there is a bit of a growth curve that she goes through before she is successful.
As all rock stars do.
Yes.
Absolutely. Pat, it must be difficult. You bring to mind that, kids kind of have this idea of who they are and who they are in the world. And that starts getting formed at a very young age. But then they get into places like school, and then suddenly they discover that, maybe who I think I am and who I want to be isn't what the world wants me to be.
Yeah, and there's a balance between that, because Lupe enters kindergarten and she's got 3 rock star rules that she lives by, and her classroom teacher has 3 school rules. And so she's got to figure out, how can I follow the school rules and not give up who I am as a rock star? And she figures out a way to do that. It's kind of cool. And I know, I'm not sure if you know this, but the story is loosely based on what happened to E when they went to kindergarten. And so I think we should let E tell that story, just because it's a wonderful story.
Yeah, so when I was in kindergarten, I went to a school in a little tiny town called Mathis, Texas, in South Texas. And I rolled up into kindergarten with a KISS, as in the band, the KISS belt buckle, the KISS t-shirt, the KISS medallion, the KISS metal lunchbox, and some cheap gas station aviator sunglasses that reflected. and I strutted down the kindergarten hallway just thinking I was going to be the drummer for KISS, and a teacher called me out by my name and said, "Hey, take off those sunglasses." And I pivoted and I looked her dead in the eye. Well, she couldn't see it, but I looked her in the eye and I said, "Can't do it. I'm a rock star." And immediately went to the office on the first day of kindergarten, trying to plead my case that, in fact, as a young Mexican-American, my dream was to be the drummer for KISS. And, of course, I had to bring all of that energy to my first day. So it was definitely a unique experience.
You know, it reminds me of when I entered first grade, and I was there. I had two cousins, same age as me. We were all in the same class. And the teacher went through the roll. And she said, "Did I miss anybody?" I raised my hand, and she said, "What's your name?" And I said, "It's Jed Doherty." And she looked, and she goes, "No, your name is George Doherty." And I said, "Oh, no, that's my dad." And my cousins are like, "Yeah, no, that's his dad. That's Jed." And the teacher just sent me home, said, "Go home and find out what your name is."
Oh, no. Stop it. No.
I think you both had kindergarten teachers that could have done a little better.
Now, in fairness, of course, Jed and I had our experiences, but Pat, how was your experience compared to my experience? Let's look at that real quick.
Well, my experience in kindergarten, I was a very quiet kid. I did not have any of Lupe's energy. I was very much a rule follower. And the only time I got in trouble in kindergarten was we were all given milk at snack time, and I didn't drink my milk fast enough. And so the teacher called my mother, and we had a discussion about this. And my mom was thoroughly on my side and sent a note to school and said that I drank plenty of milk at home and I didn't have to drink milk at snack time. And so my mother stood up for me, against the tyranny of enforced dairy products.
I think that could be a book, The Tyranny of Enforced Dairy Products.
There you go. In the state of Wisconsin. Let's see how that goes.
Yeah, I might get in trouble.
Well, wow. Just think, and of course, my kindergarten was long before both of you were born, probably. But kindergarten is one of those places that's so important to us. There was a book that was out when I was in graduating from high school. Everything I really needed to know, I learned in kindergarten. And kindergarten is one of those places where you kind of learn the important things: getting along with others, taking turns, being nice.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, we learn community in kindergarten. I mean, it's no mistake. We learn, look both ways. We start learning. I mean, we might learn to read earlier, but, so many formidable moments happen in that early year, that moment, of how we interact with other people and how we build trust and also how we respect other people's space, right? We're kind of all thrown together. And it's a structured experience. And so I think it's a really wonderful time. And I'm glad that Pat and I got to write a character that would reflect that experience. And also, how can you grow through that experience,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because Ian and I say a lot that, we think, all kids are rock stars, whether they're into music or whether they're into art or whether they're into, whatever they're into. You can be a rock star. And I think the book is about holding on to that and staying true to you, even when you have to, be in community with others.
Yeah. E, what ways do you think we as a kindergarten teachers, we as a society can just kind of reinforce that idea that, hey, you are a rock star. You are special. You are an important member of our community?
First I'm going to say that I think most teachers are just amazing in what they're doing and how much they've pivoted in the last few years specifically. And so first off, I have to say thank you to them and for what they're doing in the classroom. And then the other thing is specifically to your question is recognizing that every young person comes into your room with their own story and they come in there with their own experiences. And we can't always know that story. It's how we sometimes talk about, the selfie generation and what we see sometimes in the social media isn't the true story. And so it's really important to recognize that every young person that's walking in that door has their own experience and their own story. And some of them are beautiful stories. Some of them are stories of people like Lupe who want to come in and just really kind of, rock out her true identity of music. And other kids have harder stories, and they're bringing that into the classroom too. And it's about trying to find where each kid can shine. Like Pat was saying, Pat is saying that we think every young person can be a rock star because it's about standing in your truth and being who you are. And sometimes that's one of the hardest things we can do, right? Mm-hmm. And for teachers to see that in young people right from the start and recognize, yeah, they're a handful sometimes, but what is it about them that makes them them? And what is the story behind them when they come into your room, you know? Pat, what would you say?
I think you said it perfectly.
Well, I'll take that then.
Yeah. I'm Pat, how do you think we can get to move closer to that point where we all first recognize that we each have a story, and then get everybody to actually be interested in learning each other's stories?
Yeah, when I go and talk to kids in classrooms, and sometimes when I talk to adults who want to write for kids, I've got a couple slides in a PowerPoint presentation, and they basically say, everybody has a story. Most people have more than one. You should absolutely tell your story in whatever way that works for you, but it's equally important to listen to other people's stories, because that's how we see that we have more in common than we might have thought. That's how we develop empathy. That's how we, do a better job fitting into the world around us. And I think, unfortunately, that, listening to other people's stories, is something that a lot of people struggle with, or they're trying to take someone else's story and fit it into their own narrative and somehow make it work for them. A couple of years ago, I decided that I was going to spend a year and I was going to really focus on reading books written by people that were different than me in some way, whether it was, a different race, a different religion, a different gender identity, just different life experiences. And it was just a wonderful year. I learned so much about other people, and it's something, I've continued to try to make a conscious effort to do. So I think, listening to other people's stories just makes you a better human.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. E, one of the things that I think is hard for us to be hearing other people's stories, I think a lot of people don't know their own story, and it takes them a while to kind of discover their own story. I don't know what it's like in Texas. I know when I traveled down south, I was really one of the first times I toured down there. It was I was in a mall waiting for my daughter to come out of a store, and a woman sat down next to me who was a little bit older than I was, so maybe like 105. And and in the course of 10 minutes, I learned her whole story. I learned about her husband and their kids and this and was living here and here. That's not something that we do up north, here in Boston. We're kind of more reserved. How can we get to the point where it's like, this is me and this is who I recognize I am, and I want to share the story with the world?
Wow. So, that really speaks into, conversations that Pat and I have quite often, and kind of, my own personal mission in life, which is about young people feeling that they have authority over their story, that they can be heard. And I think, when you, even with something, we look at our picture book, and the picture book itself is it's entertainment. It has a moment of learning, but it also opens up conversation, right? And what you just talked about is, of course, someone was slightly older than you, and she sat beside you, and she shared her story. Yes, being raised down in Texas, but traveling elsewhere, I've found that often, if you're open to hearing, there's so much people want to share. And I think sometimes we just have to open that door to conversation and to welcome that story. As far as encouraging that in young people, it's finding where are their interests. Do they want to be a drummer like Lupe? Do they want to not drink their milk as fast as everyone else in class? Each of us carries that story into the world. And I think sometimes, whether it's in the books that we read or the music we listen to, or, the struggles we face, we just have to open ourselves up to listening. And that goes back to what Pat just said, is we really need to listen to people and to hear their story. And I think young people have so much they want to share. It's just often they get closed out of the conversations that are about them. Mm. And we have to say, well, what do you think? Mm-hmm. And listen. And there's ways then when we can grow. And so I just find that more often than not, I'll be somewhere and I'll sit down like you did with someone slightly older than me, maybe, 107. And when I do, I find that people want to share. Sometimes they just don't know if that bridge exists between the two of us. And that, we got to get past those differences. And that's why, when Pat talked about reading those books, I remember that and her sharing that. And I thought, wow, I need to do more of that. Just because I'm Mexican American doesn't mean that I've read the plethora that is out there. And we do that with picture books. Pat, you know how we get those stacks? And we just go through them, And so.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, I think. That whole idea of listening. Pat, one of the things that I've noticed especially when my son was in middle school and I had the minivan and I'd be driving all the kids around, there'd be this constant chatter and kids going back and forth. But one of the things I noticed was they weren't listening to each other. They weren't having a conversation. They were just waiting for each other's turn to speak. And I gave them a pass. Middle school, you're still learning. But I know adults in my life. I was recently at an event function the other day and spent time with a person who was just interested in waiting till it was his turn to talk. And how do you think we can encourage, Pat, how do you think we encourage kids to actually listen?
Well, I mean, I was a journalist in a previous lifetime, before I started writing for kids. And I think, knowing how to ask good questions is important, and I think that's certainly a skill you can teach people. You can't force people to necessarily listen to the answers, but I think if you know the right questions to ask and if you're at all open to it, you can learn a lot about other people. And I just also want to say, when I was took a psychology class in college, there was a guy who did a study with adults where they actually got people's permission and families to record them, over a period of a couple weeks. And they found so many adults had conversations where one person would say, "Oh, the Mets lost last night. That's just terrible." And then their spouse would respond, "We're out of milk and bread." And so they're having a conversation, but on two totally different topics, and neither one is really connecting. So I think it's a universal problem no matter how old you are.
Yeah.
Hey, Pat, can I ask you something? Is when you go and you're working with kids, right? What are some of the exercises you do to help them be active listeners? What are some of those things? Is it a phrase when I did the thing with if someone only knew and got people to have a conversation? Is there?
I've had them do brainstorming. I've had them actually help me think. I'll read them two of my books. Maybe my Soapy Squash book, and we'll talk about how that all came to be. And then I'll have them brainstorm ideas for what could be a sequel that maybe I would write. And then I write down everything they say, and so they're sort of building off each other. Like one kid will say something, and then another one will chime in with something else. Another exercise I do with older kids that isn't so much listening, but maybe empathy, is I have these laminated pictures of all different kinds of kids from around the world and real kids, not models. And I give them, they get to choose whichever kid they want. And then I have them answer questions about what they think that kid's life might be like and how they could perhaps turn that into a story. And so it forces them to look at somebody else and think, okay, what might this person be like and what might their life be like?
I think that's really important because there are stereotypes that kind of we learn and a lot of times people just look and they try to fill in the blanks using these stereotypes as opposed to hey, let me really find out who this person is.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I mean, if you put Pat and I next to each other when we first met, even now in some respects, it's we couldn't be more different if you put us in a picture right next to each other. I'm someone who wears either hoodies or a leather jacket. I have tattoos and I wear jeans and skate shoes. Pat's a little bit more polished than I am.
I wear a lot of cardigans.
Yeah, a lot of cardigans. And, the hair is kind of in place and mine looks like I just have I woke up. And so, but at a human level, when you get past this part, which is our exterior, at a human level, Pat and I are great friends and we're great collaborators, at least for me.
And we have a lot in common.
And we have so much in common. And that's about getting past whatever this outside part is. And again, that goes back to listening and getting to know people and having those conversations and willingness to do it, And so I always love that example. I can't wait to be in more schools where I get to stand with Pat, and that's just who we are. And then we get to do these presentations with young people, and they get to have this sort of live action version of what differences can look like, and still how two people can create, together. I mean, we're going to have 4 picture books when this is done. And that's a really wonderful thing, Pat, of course, has written many more, and it's, of course, my first. But, it's been a wonderful collaboration with someone that if you looked at us, you would think, there's no way those two people are working together and are close friends.
Like each other.
Yeah.
Well, E, since you brought it up, the differences, how did two people, one from Wisconsin, one from Texas, one different, places in the world, how did you two come to collaborate and develop this friendship?
Well, I knew.
Jump
in. No, go ahead.
The first time I always knew who E was, like through Facebook, because they've written YA in middle grade and won awards, and so I always knew who they were. But I knew someone who knew E, and E was coming through Madison for a documentary that they were making and needed a place to stay. And so they ended up staying at my house. And so, we had never met or even talked. And suddenly, they're staying with me, and we got to know each other. And I remember we just sat around and talked and talked and talked and talked and talked. And then we were friends for a long time. And then he had an idea for Lupe, which I'll let you talk about. And we decided that, we could work together to make it happen.
Well, I'm going to actually walk it back one step before I go to Lupe. And I'm going to tell, Pat was at a writer's retreat, and this friend of mine who made it possible for me to sleep at Pat's when I was working on the documentary, Pat's sitting at a table. You're going to totally cringe. Pat's sitting at the table, and my friend, Gia Gordon, who's an author, is texting me, and something happened in the conversation. Pat says, who are you? You're texting E Charlton Trujillo?
I was astounded that they knew them. And I was
they knew me. And it was so funny because later on, I always use that on her. It's like, remember when you couldn't imagine that you could talk to me? And so, but then years pass. And then when we get to the Lupe, I had this idea, and I'm not one of those people that says, well, okay, I have ADHD. I have a lot of ideas, but I'm not one of those people that believes picture book writing is easy. I think it's an art form. I came to Pat with this idea, and I said, listen, everybody says a story from my childhood is something. And I gave her sort of the bones. She had a little apprehension, and she sent me off to do a little work, which I'm so grateful for. I did a lot of work, and I came back, and I somehow convinced her to do it. And she had never collaborated before, and she had many picture books in. And she's really a solo act like Lupe wants to be. But I brought her along. She joined the band, and the next thing it was a little bumpy at first because I had a certain way, she had a certain way, but in the end, the most important thing is that we would maintain our friendship. That's the one thing I always said.
A really nice book too,
Yeah.
And I think it was good for me. When you work alone, I always say, if you have an argument with yourself, you always win it. But when you're working with the collaborator, and you have difference of opinion of how things should go, you've got to actually be able to justify why you want, and you've got to listen to the other person's. And it's like temporarily painful, but it gets you to a really good place down the road.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's made it possible for me to now actually collaborate with other people and feel like I can do that. And, as a filmmaker, I've always collaborated. But this is different. When you're writing, it tends to be a very solo experience. Mm-hmm. But now from working with Pat, it makes me open, and I'm actually collaborating on a novel, and I'm really excited. So
not with me,
not with her, no. But I'm still trying with her though. I won't give up.
All right. Hey, I'm so happy that happened and that you two met. And Pat, I'm really happy. They always say never meet your heroes. It turns out that, when you met your hero, it was a good thing.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. Well, I know people are going to want to know where they can go to find out more about Lupe Lopez, Rockstar Rules, and find out more about both of you. So first, where can we find you online?
Oh, that's a really good question. You just put my name in the old database and it pops up. So E Charlton Trujillo, and then my website will pop up. And you can find me on social media at Pinata Director. So like the thing you hit, but a filmer. Yeah, so there you go, at Pinata Director.
Awesome. And Pat, where can we find you online?
My website is www.patzietlowmiller.com. I'm on Twitter at Pat, letter Z, Miller. I'm also on Instagram, but Twitter is my favorite place to hang out.
She loves Twitter.
Yeah,
Loves.
Twitter is fun.
Loves.
We loved spending time with the authors of Lupe Lopez Rockstar Rules, Pat Zieitlow Miller and E Charlton Trujillo. My friends, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Kashmira Sheath. She'll be here to celebrate her Nina Sony series. That's the next episode of the podcast. Hey, if you are the author of a fantastic children's book, we would love for you to visit our newly redesigned website, readingwithyourkids.com. Please click on the Authors Click Here button at the top of the page because we want you to know how we can help you celebrate your book to the world. You can be a guest here on the podcast. Being a guest is fun, it's easy, it doesn't cost a thing, and it gives you the chance to tell thousands of people about your fantastic book. You can also find out how you can submit your book to our Certified Great Read panel, and if they believe that your book is worthy of 4 or 5 stars, it becomes a Certified Great Read. You can also find out about our monthly promotion program. We will celebrate your book with commercials here in the podcast, messages to our 100,000 plus combined social media followers, display your book on our nationwide network of digital pedestrian billboards, and also have your book with us in our booth at whatever a live event we happen to be part of in a given month. You can learn all about that and more by going to readingwithyourkids.com. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our guests, Pat Zieitlow Miller and E Charlton Trujillo. Please be sure to check out Lupe Lopez Rockstar Rules. Also want to thank our sponsor, Linda Cutting. Please be sure to check out A is for Always. I want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Mirabella Q. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.